The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Hi, I'm Christine Ulm, the United States Secretary of Homeland Security. If you plan on traveling, we need your help to prevent delays and to prove your identity. Get a real ID. Starting May 7th, you will need a real ID to travel by air or to visit federal buildings in the United States. These IDs keep our country safe because they help prevent fraud and they enhance security. Please do your part to protect our country. Go today and don't delay. To learn more, go to dhs.gov/real-ID. Thank you.
Well, good morning, CHD. It is Thursday, 19th of June, 2025, and we're here with Financial Rebellion. And don't worry, we have not gone mad playing that at the beginning of the show. We are here to address the little porky pies. And the best person that we have, Catherine and Carolyn, is it not, is Twila Brase. So let's bring her onto the show immediately to tell us what is really true. Good morning, Twila.
Good morning. It's so great to be here.
Well, that was a bit of a shocker opening. I'm sure Solari subscribers will be, what is going on right now? So do put it right, please.
Oh, it's not shocking when a government official lies to you. We're used to that, right?
Oh my goodness. She has lied so many times on this. So that's just one of the interviews that she has done. And the interesting thing about this is that, so she did this and she got all sorts of pushback on social media with people saying that's not true. You can fly with a passport. What is she talking about? And then on May 6th, she gets in front of Congress and she says, oh, yes, of course, you know, people who don't have real IDs, we will let them fly. There might be a few more steps of security, but we will make sure that they meet their travel itinerary. Those are her words. And then I found just a few days ago that on Instagram, the very next day, May 7th, right? She's on Instagram saying, today, you will need a real ID if you want to fly.
What? See,
Seriously.
this is all nudging. It's called nudging, and the belief if you just press and push and bully, you can get people to do what you want, no matter what the law is.
Well,
I think we should go back, if it's okay with you, and remind people what real ID even is, and remind them
Right.
about their licenses and things like that, because they may have missed our last show with Twila.
certainly, and there are so many people that are very confused about this. So that is a very good idea. Yeah, take a look, and you'll see that that picture that you were showing there. If it's got the star, yeah, there you go. So the star is on the left side. The not for federal identification is the traditional state driver's license, but they added that language to it, right? So the real ID has a star, and only in Washington state does it have something different. It's got a flag. But everywhere else, it's got a star of some form. In California, it's a bear with a star inside of it, the bear. And so you have to know what the thing looks like so that you can pull out your driver's license and figure out, do you have a state driver's license? Or do you have a real ID, which is actually a federal ID for a national surveillance system? So it's under control of the federal government, and they're just allowing the states who have complied with this, they're just allowing the states to allow it to be a driver's license, because then, of course, it confuses the public. The public thinks it's just a standard state driver's license with a star. But it's actually a federal ID under federal control. And yes, they're letting you use it for driving, but there's so many other purposes that they plan to have it used for in the future. I think a few other things to say about the Real ID is that a lot of people feel like it's just such a convenience. It's no different than having a passport. What's the big deal? If it is really federal, coming from the federal government, I have a passport anyway, so I've shared all that data. It doesn't matter. But that's not the plan for the Real ID. The plan for the Real ID is to be an internal passport, which should just make you perturbed if you know anything about the Constitution and freedom. This idea that you have to use this federal ID to be able to travel anywhere, but it won't be limited. I know, like traveling from state to state could be potential, because that's what it is now with the idea that you have to use it to fly, is they want you to force you to use a federal ID to travel from state to state by flying, but it won't stop there. It'd probably be by Amtrak, train, other kinds of trains, that sort of thing, where it could become an internal passport, and not only for travel, but for transactions. So I think, to see how big that the Real ID could become is really important, to understand that a regular passport just gets you back into your country and gets you out of the country, and just identifies you as a citizen of the United States for traveling outside of the United States and for coming back in. The Real ID, on the other hand, is an internal passport.
Twila, I am
And
shocked to tell you this, really shocked to tell you this, but I spoke to a group of people recently who were trying to argue it with me, and they were saying, look, it's going to be really good. It's going to stop sex trafficking. It's going to stop terrorists coming in. It's going to keep us all safe. How do you address that?
Yeah. Yeah, so there's all of these thoughts that this is magically going to save us from the things that the government isn't doing now, but could be doing now, with everybody having a standard driver's license, the things that they used to do all the time, right? And so it's not going to keep us safe. So for one thing, it came out after 9/11, but all of those terrorists had perfectly valid IDs and passports. It would not have kept them off the planes. And when it comes to illegals, that's the other thing. People say, well, keep illegals out. Well, there's 19 states already giving driver's licenses to illegals and letting them, have something that looks very, very much like what all legals and all real citizens have. Then other people say, well, we need it for voting. Well, the last thing that you want is the federal government in control of voting. People have to be reminded, I think, of the fact of how this country was formed. And it was formed by states who very gingerly decided that there should be a central government for certain functions. And they limited those functions within the Constitution, telling them, here you can go, but no further. And after that, according to the 10th Amendment, it's all about the states and about individuals. And this is because the people in those 50 states remembered what it was like to be under a king. And they did not want to have the federal government overreaching and encroaching into the states, and they wanted to protect themselves and their people from an overreaching government. But if you give voting over to the federal government by saying you have to have a federal ID to vote, what happens when you get a Harris administration or an AOC administration? And further than that, when you think about how their plans are to digitize it, put it on your phone, and have remote real-time access to it. This means it will ping the DMV, the government, every time you pull that thing out and use it. But not only that, imagine in a Harris administration, for example, where they want to keep you in your 15-minute cities, and they will know when you leave. So, this is a tyrannical, totalitarian system that is, the framework is being set up here. It doesn't look like it now. It doesn't even have an RFID chip in it. But the whole idea here is really to build a social credit system for America, a digital, biometric controlled social credit system.
right. So I just want to jump in because I want to stress again, the reason that these things are happening is because we're not enforcing the current laws. We have the laws on the books, we have the capacity, and we have the surveillance system to stop any crime in this country if we wanted to. And so I did a many-year deep dive on the narcotics trafficking in America, and I have an online book called Dylan Reed and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits. And Carolyn and I did a deep dive on that and topics like asset forfeiture. And what we discovered was that there was a real private partnership, public-private partnership between the government and, organized crime that was running and profiting from these businesses. It's very integrated into the economy. And the notion that you can't stop any of these things with every capacity we have already and every law and regulation in the books is absurd. And so the notion that if you're not enforcing the current laws, that getting more laws or more surveillance capacity is going to somehow help is ridiculous. And yet, we, in year after year in my entire life, I see more more funding, more laws, more things justifying, but it doesn't stop the crime. It simply gives more control to a few people to control the economy and the politics. And there's no difference here. I should note, just for everybody to know, that for many years, the people who wanted decentralized control have been trying to get a national digital ID, and the real ID, if I remember correctly from what you've taught us, was passed with the Patriot Act, and it's taken years to get the states to introduce it and help manage and enforce it, and they're still trying. Is that not correct?
Yes, but this is, just so you know, this was a must-have, as they called it, defense spending bill, national defense spending bill for, I believe, our soldiers in Iraq, if I recall correctly. And
Okay.
actually, when you look at the testimony, I'm sorry, but the comments from the floor of the U.S. Senate, what you hear are Democrats in particular talking about how they didn't have a hearing on this in the Senate. They never talked about it in a conference committee. This was simply brought before them with this language on this must-have defense spending bill, and they were told to vote on it. Now, this is when the Republicans were in charge, and even Lamar Alexander said this is a national identification card, and
Right.
America's never had it before. And he didn't think it was actually a very good idea, keeping in mind civil rights and keeping in mind federalism. He thought it was wrong. That was the word he used. He thought it was wrong. Now, I actually haven't looked up his vote to figure out whether he voted for it or not, but obviously the thing passed, right? And so it was a done deal when it came out to the floor for them to all vote on.
One of the questions I get a lot is the federal government already has a lot of data and databases on all of us. How can this add anything that's worse? And what I explain to them is that what the bankers need is a very high quality, high precision database, and with the feds, with the states helping to manage it, that helps get it there, but that is interoperable with other systems globally. And what the Real ID is provides a high quality or a higher quality integrated system in a way that the feds have never had before. Would you think that's a reasonable description?
I would, and I would say that even though this is something I tell people, even though they have a lot of data on us, they don't have this. And you always know when you're talking with legislators that you know that they don't have something when they're pushing to get something. They don't have it, and they want it. And so they don't have what they need, no matter how much data they have. They don't have it together in a way. They don't have it in a just one entity, right? That card, because they intend it to be an internal passport, to have all of this kind of control within the country. The passport is about going out of the country, and that's a limited amount of data that you give for a passport. But this, when you look at the law itself, it says that that the Real ID is going to be required for access to federal buildings, access to nuclear facilities, access to commercial airlines, and any other purposes that the Secretary of Homeland Security shall determine. any other purposes. The sky is the limit. The secretary claims in a rule that they do not have to go back to Congress or to the president. And so if Kristi Noem, for example, really wants to get everybody to conform and conform now, they would do something like adding access to medical care or access to buy a gun or access to go to college. They would add these sorts of things. Right now, there's 44% of all cards and IDs that are not Real ID compliant. And of course, we are trying to increase that number and working, very hard to do so. But I just think you have to understand they don't have what they want, and we have to keep them from getting
Right.
what they want.
Right. Now, you've been working with Congress, and I know you've been working at the state level too. Tell us what, who's helping to turn the situation around both at the federal and state level?
Well, I'd like to say at the federal level that we had people helping. Now, we do have Congressman Thomas Massey, who has come out a bunch of times on social media to talk about Real ID and, basically saying you don't know, you won't figure out what they want to do with it until everybody has it, and then it'll be too late, right?
Right.
He'll say things like that. But, we're not getting any help from Rand Paul's office, nothing that we can see so far, as he's, committee chair of Homeland Security Committee. So we're not getting a lot of help at the federal level, although we certainly are taking things in to, sending things into Trump. We did send a letter to Trump, and whoever got that letter sent it to TSA. They sent it to TSA to answer us, and then we put out on social media, and Lou could certainly look for that at our Twitter site of @CCHFreedom, and it's probably at mine too, but we redlined that letter and we put it out to correct the TSA about their claims, like that it wasn't a national ID, or they even thanked me for contacting him, the guy. And I said, and we crossed out and said, President Trump, So we put a lot of truth in our redlining of the TSA letter, but we're really focusing on the people and focusing on the states. So there are eight states. Yeah, there you go. we have 8 states where we have legislators who have either passed or introduced resolutions or introduced laws. There's even been a hearing in the state of Maine, and that letter has Republican Laura Libby as the author, but she's got 5 Democrat co-authors. And so, this is a bipartisan issue, and everybody should be concerned about what it does to privacy, what it does to states' rights. So we've got that. So there's at least 8 states, and we know that there are several others that are contemplating it because we've been talking to legislators in different states.
And they think they can roll back the state's participation, or they're willing to try.
Yeah, exactly right. They're willing to try. They're willing to bring it up. And, the thing is that the public is so confused about this issue. As far as they're concerned, 1, they have to have it to fly. 2, it's no big deal. 3, it's a done deal. They think all of these things, right? And so they're not concerned, or they're not taking action. And to have all of these different state legislators now bring up bills to counter Real ID is really important, even for movement at any level,
Right.
Movement of the people. And the strongest thing, of course, is for just the people to refuse. And so there's only, 5 states where the people can't refuse a Real ID, and those are all, unfortunately, Republican states: Georgia, Texas, Florida, Wyoming, and Mississippi. But even in those, so in all the other states, they can just make the switch. So we're asking them to make the switch, and at our special website, which is refuserealid.org, refuserealid.org, people like your listeners will be able to find a variety of documents. And one of them is Lose the Real ID. And we ask people to make a switch back to freedom. And we know that people all across this land are doing so because we are hearing from them. And we love to get the stories because so you can see right there that red, the one with red at the top, that's the Lose the Real ID, and gives you really crystal clear instructions on the backside how to do it if you're worried. But for the most part, people have just gone in. They've said, I don't want a Real ID anymore. I want a standard state driver's license. and they've made the switch, and it's been just that simple. There's only been a few states where either they've said, nope, can't do it, even though I think the law probably lets them, but the DMV isn't letting them. But most of the time, it's just been, as one person from California said, easy, easy.
Yeah, Twyla, can I just say that we get a lot of letters from people asking about the Real ID, and we've heard a number of stories where we've found out that the people who are populating the driver's license bureaus say information that's not true. So they say you have to get a Real ID, or and this in particular in Tennessee, or you can't get, you can't switch it back. And so one of our subscribers suggested, because she sent her husband in with a copy of what was on the DMV website that said you didn't have to get one. But it is a good idea if you're wanting to stick with the regular state ID, if you can find whatever justification you have on the website or otherwise in the law indicating that they don't have to do that. Because as I understand it, there's a national coalition, you'll know the name of it, of driver's license bureaus. And they're all members, and they get their information not from their own legislators or the attorney general. They're getting information from this trade organization that's promoting things like the Real ID on a national basis, and that is not a regulatory organization. So they're getting false information. Is that what you're hearing?
Yeah, so we're calling these agents rogue DMV agents, right? Because there's an actual rule and there's an actual law, and they have to be following that. That's what they should be following. And we have a history, which I'll say in a moment, of them not doing that in an interim when Real ID wasn't being pushed. But for the moment, what we hear from people is they go in and they aren't even asked, even though there's a choice in the law. They're not asked. They're just given the Real ID. They don't even know there's something else, and they don't realize what they've got in their hands. And then you're talking about AMVA, the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, AMVA, and they're the ones that testified to Congress saying our plans are to digitize the Real ID, put it on phones, and have remote and real-time access to it, right? And AMVA has gotten federal money to create this system. I'll just call it a pointer system. And so all by themselves, the DMVs and this AMVA group decided that they would make sure that people could have only one driver's license. So they say one driver, one license. Now, this is not a rule or a law anywhere, but because they have all come together to do this, they will not let you keep a driver's license, for instance, in Florida, if you move to Kentucky, let's just say. But there's actually no rules or laws about that. So they've just created this system. It's a pointer system. And when the DMV goes in to see if you've got a license somewhere else, it will point to you, and it will say that you've got a license in this state. And then it won't let you get the DMV won't let you get another license unless you give up the other license that you have. So they have done this thing all on their own. They are rogue. They are, as you say, AMVA is its own non-government entity, but it has gotten money to set up this system and database, and federal money, that is. But then the other thing that we know about them as rogue DMV agents, which is why I said, I think that like in Indiana, where they said you can't switch once you've made the switch, they won't let you switch back, right? That's what Indiana said. And I think you're saying that's what somebody in Tennessee said as well. So I'm thinking that they're rogue as well. But in between, so in the history of Real ID, so it passed in 2005. The first proposed rule came out in 2007, and state legislatures suddenly realized what had happened. And yes, we have this history. Thank you, Lou, for pulling that up. They realized what had happened, and they started passing laws against Real ID and resolutions opposing Real ID. And there it sat until 2015, when Obama shouted from the rooftops that in 2016 you wouldn't be able to fly without a Real ID. So again, a lie, but meant it to push in that direction. And then all the states started to fall because their constituents were afraid that they couldn't fly, and they were calling their legislators, and states just sort of gave in over the next 3 years. But in between that time, when those resolutions and state laws prohibited conformance and Obama yelled from the rooftops, in between that time, we thought nothing was happening. Except we found out from an article that was published in May of 2020 that actually this little Real ID office in the Department of Homeland Security had figured out that they could go to DMVs directly. So they started to fund DMVs, even in these states where it was against the law to do anything with Real ID. These states started to take the money from this Real ID office in Homeland Security, and they started just building up their driver's license system till it was basically 95% of the way to compliance, so that they were ready when it would be pushed over, right? So they were doing it behind the backs of legislators, behind the backs of their governors, and outside of state law. So they were violating the law. So when I say DMV, rogue DMV agents, I mean it. They have a history of it.
Wow. So sorry, Polly, go ahead.
No, if you want to stay on the subject, I want to go back to the 5 states you were talking, but can finish off this subject if you have questions.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so Twila, I want to go back to you. Did you say that 5 states you have to have Real ID? They will not allow you to have anything but? Is that
Statutorily.
And Texas is one of them. So let's talk about when my driving license runs out and I live in Texas, I have to have a Real ID. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, you have to have the federal ID. And we are trying to get people to see the difference between having a state driver's license or a state ID and a federal ID. Yes, that is correct. They are forcing you into the federal identification system, into the federal surveillance system, because they have, by statute, not given you a choice to have a state driver's license. So you've been forced into the federal system and out of the state system.
Yeah, and can I just comment that there were some other states, and I want to say Maryland is one, and there was one in the Midwest, Missouri, Iowa, Kansas, one of them, where we had people who couldn't get the Real ID or a non-Real ID. And what happens is that they have regulations or procedural rules that don't allow them. The only people, in the case I looked at, the only people who could get a non-Real ID were people who were maybe legally living in the United States but not citizens. So there was actually a provision for certain people to get a non-Real ID, but it was not something that applied to other people. So there were procedural, I don't know whether they were they probably weren't regulations, but some sort of legalistic procedural rules that the DMV followed that didn't allow someone who is not in that restricted category to get a non-Real ID. Are you familiar with situations like that?
Yes, and of course, rules are unconstitutional, right? Because these are non-elected folks who are creating these things, and they've never had a vote in the state legislature or at the level of Congress. They've never had a vote in Congress with federal rules. And so, yes, and then they follow them, and it's up to legislators to shut them down if legislators know that it's happening and they want to shut it down. And so this is why it's a very big public campaign. And this is the other reason why we're asking people to not wait until your driver's license is up for renewal. Do it now, because these rogue DMV agents are likely to try and figure out how to get the states to shut down any access to anything other than this federal ID and the real ID. And so you've got to do it now. Just spend the $10 or the $20 or whatever it is. Take the time, because it's your freedom that's at stake here. And this is a very small price to pay for freedom. Right now, even South Dakota will give you a driver's license, a state driver's license, even though 99% of their state is Real ID compliant, because they never came up against Real ID. Everybody assumes that it's just a driver's license, right? But we had somebody in South Dakota who called the capital city, called the DMV in the capital, and said, I don't want a Real ID. Can I have a state driver's license? And they said, oh yeah, sure, just ask for it. But see, you have to ask for it. And nobody tells them that it's even possible. So we are hoping to get lots of more people in South Dakota to turn this around and to make sure that legislators don't shut down the option.
Now, Twila, do you think it's worth it to call the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division or whatever office they have that will take complaints and complain about that sort of thing?
I think that is a great idea. And I would say that the good news from our perspective is that we have just had an opportunity to talk to a bunch of state AGs, attorneys general, and told them all about the Real ID issue, a whole bunch of them around a table, and asked them to act. And so we are bringing this issue to the state attorneys general because they have a responsibility, which they call vertical federalism. And they consider themselves basically like the last defense, for states' rights. And, to get them informed, both a Democrat and Republican is a wonderful idea. We have sent letters to all state attorney generals in the country, plus the territories that we have. So every AG, all 56 AGs have received a letter. We have had some responses, but not much, and that's why we were very happy to stand in front of this group of AGs and tell them about this issue. And there is interest. And so I think that for every person who is hearing this, to just send a short note or a short call or something to the Attorney General in your state, if they get even 5 or 6 letters, suddenly it becomes something that they have to pay attention to. They realize that there's something going on. And I do believe that we as people are the biggest force of power in this entire thing. If we can move that number from 44% non-compliant, to 50% and then 55% and up, we are the ones who will stop this, and we are the ones that will encourage state legislators to extract themselves from Real ID and AGs to shut down access to the Real ID in the state. And I am here to tell you, if you have just one state that says no to the Real ID, suddenly it becomes very difficult at the airport, right? So they can mandate that all the people in the state of Maine, use passports or something, but they'll know that not everybody will get a passport. And suddenly they will be denying people access to flight. And this is wholly unconstitutional. So, we don't need everybody, but we need a lot of people to act.
So, Twila, one of the things I run into when I try and explain this is people who've lived in relative freedom to travel where they want and go where they want, can't fathom that this could happen in the United States, let alone that their state legislators and federal representatives would all know this and be working towards this over many years. They can't fathom it. And so my question is are there any tools or videos or stories that help them understand that? So for example, on financial control, I always use the Canadian truckers. And I have videos of central bankers talking about how they're going to have complete control. However, that whole system rests on having a digital ID system. And that's why I think this is, step one is you've got to kill the digital ID. So what are the tools you use to help them literally fathom this?
Well, sometimes what I do is I just talk about what it's like to have a national ID. We can call it a federal ID here because we have a federal government, but in a lot of countries it's just national, right? They're just one country without any states. So I just look to countries like India or countries like Ghana, where you cannot even file your taxes in Ghana without your national ID. That national ID is required for absolutely everything you do: opening a bank account, traveling anywhere, getting into a hotel room. And so what I also like to do, and Lou could perhaps just go to idemia.com, and I can show them a little bit about IDEMIA, which is who is in cahoots with the federal government in multiple contracts to enforce this biometric system. And so perfect. So there you go. So this is IDEMIA. And all you have to do is when you're at the airport, I want everybody to now start to see IDEMIA. I want you to see IDEMIA. So look at the architecture or the machinery around your TSA security agents at the checkpoint, right? And look at TSA pre-check. So IDEMIA runs TSA pre-check. IDEMIA created all of the national IDs for the country of India, 1 billion of them. And then I go to biometricupdate.com and I get a daily summary of news, and it shows all the places in the world where biometric IDs and national IDs are being imposed, and the different things you can and cannot do if you don't have a national ID, and it's all based on digital. So this is real, and I think I should say something about biometrics, because IDEMIA control is based on biometrics, but so is Real ID. So Real ID requires a biometric, and I don't know the degree to which your viewers understand biometrics, but the Real ID requires a biometric scan of your face. So that thing that you saw with IDEMIA with all those points, it needs to be a biometric photograph. But the rule for Real ID says that they can include in the future other biometrics like thumbprint, palm print, DNA, fingerprints. And in Oklahoma, they've already added the thumbprint, right? And so if you think about what IDEMIA is saying, even in their own videos, their intention is to see you from a long ways away, and they will know your face, and they will figure out who you are. And the thing that should really cause you to get perturbed about all of this is the fact that this is the government claiming that they can collect and catalog the coordinates of your body for their control. That's what is transpiring here. And that's totally against the Fourth Amendment, which says you should be secure in your person. Well, you're no longer secure in your person if they are cataloging parts of your person in order to know where you are and what you're doing and who you're with, and to decide whether or not you can or cannot move or travel in any direction. And so IDEMIA has a $46 million contract with TSA. A $46 million contract with TSA. And those cameras at the airport, that is, I'm not exactly sure what they're doing with the cameras. They say that the photo is being gotten rid of, but I do think that they're probably training the biometric system, right? Training to say, though, this is your face, this is your ID. Okay, is it really good to go here? Or do we have to kind of tweak how we catalog these coordinates and how we identify people? And so you do have the right to opt out, and everybody should opt out. And all you have to do is say, I opt out of the camera. And believe me, they will let you opt out. Some of them might roll their eyes. Some of them are really, really okay with you opting out. It's like they even understand. So just understand that this is all about biometrics. And there's another contract with Customs and Border Control and IDEMIA. So IDEMIA has a huge part in this system of control and surveillance and identification from your body.
Now, I understand that sometimes they give you a hard time if you don't declare you want to opt out when you first present your passport, for example. And I also understand that they aren't necessarily even scanning your passport, that you can just walk through something and with what's in the passport, they're already detecting all that information. That hasn't been that hasn't been coordinated with Real ID yet, but is that what you see?
Yes, and the last time I went through the airport, or through the line, and I said, I'm opting out of the camera, and he goes, "Well, that's okay. You can't opt out of the other cameras." And I said to him, "Which?" He said, "The cameras up here," and I said, "Well, which cameras?" I thought that was really creative of him. That's the first time I've heard that one. And then I went back to him and I said, "So which cameras are we talking about?" He goes, "Oh, the cameras around in the air." Okay, yeah. Yeah, well, and it's possible that IDEMIA is part of those as well. I wouldn't even doubt it. But that was his way to try to get me to say, "Oh, okay," right? Just to give up. Well, don't give up. Nobody give up. And as a matter of fact, Senator Merkley, Jeff Merkley from Oregon, he's just perturbed by these cameras. And he's so perturbed that he has done Instagram videos talking about what just happened to him with the TSA. And now I noticed, and I shared with his office because he didn't yet know this, but in the DC Reagan National Airport, they now have signs that are about this big, and it says something like, "If you want to opt out of the cameras, tell us first before you give us your ID."
Now, somebody gave me a tip that if you wear sunglasses, they'll have to tell you to take the sunglasses off if they're going to take your picture. So you at least know that they're doing it if you have sunglasses on.
Well, maybe, because if you look into the IDEMIA website far enough where Lou was going there, they actually show one with a person with a mask, with glasses on, and then in reduced lighting. And they say with a mask or glasses on, no problem. But with reduced lighting, it's more of a challenge. And so when I was in Newark recently, this is the first time that I saw these lights this big that are in front of, that would show onto your face so that when they take your picture, it's much lighter, right? So, so I'm not sure that glasses will work. Maybe really dark sunglasses might
Right.
work. Right? I'm not sure. I believe that I heard that they need 32 points between your two ears in order to identify you with the face, with the facial geometry.
So I just wanted to add one story because I was at a dinner and describing the dangers of a 100% digital financial system, but the fact that the digital ID and all sorts of things happening with data collection and Palantir type contracts at the federal government were a huge danger. And there was a tech entrepreneur who felt very threatened and attacked me saying I was paranoid and a conspiracy theorist and whatever. And suddenly the most fabulous, elegant woman stood up and with the appropriate accent said, "I'm from South Africa and I had to leave. And let me tell you what happened in South Africa as soon as they got a national ID." And she said, "What this lady is describing doesn't begin to discover what will happen here if they get a complete Real ID system. You have no idea the danger you're in." And then she just ripped into what they did in South Africa. And I've seen Eastern Europeans do similar things. So if you can cultivate in your network people who've been in a society, who've lived through this transition and knows what happens when you get that national ID in place. They are eloquent and they have amazing stories.
Yeah, because they have lived it. They have lived the digital biometric control. And it reaches into every facet of your life because the databases and the cameras are everywhere. And
Mhm.
so that's why, they really want this, and we really have to stop them from having it. And it's exciting. It's exciting to know that there are people who are really interested in high places. Unfortunately, yet I don't think we actually have yet the ear of Trump. I'll bet that somebody gave that to the TSA and Trump never saw it. So I would encourage people, on Truth Social to say, "I'm all for freedom. I'm all for our Constitution. Then that is why I'm against Real ID. Please, President Trump, please." stop your administration. Stop the Real ID imposition here of your administration. Just try to capture his attention and see what might happen.
So I would love for them also to capture the attention of the state legislators, because
Absolutely.
I've just been meeting with several state legislators. They have no idea. They're just not aware of this, and they really don't understand the extent to which their state budget is funding this. Now, we've been talking about this in terms of what the digital ID will allow you, can I travel or not travel? But I just want to stress and bring this back to money. This is very much about price as well. In other words, imagine a world where everywhere you go, all travel uses carbon credits. And so now we want to tax you for how much you travel or where you travel to. So this very gets into how the government and related parties can extract financial and economic value from you. And, it gets back to the financial transaction control. I also want to bring it back to children, because one of the things that worries me the most about this is how it can influence and affect the way you bring up your children and how you bring up your children. Will homeschooling be legal? Do you have to mandate vaccines for your kids? On and on and on. There's a whole world of how families, bring up children that could be affected like this. So if children have smartphones, does that mean they're at a young age going to have to get their own digital ID?
Mhm. Yeah, that's true. And then, of course, I believe it would end up with a Vax passport as well, right? So
Right.
that and not only that, but a unique patient identifier that will connect with all of your electronic health records and determine all sorts of things about you and know, who you go to see and what medications you take. And, anything is possible, because if it connects up to the eHealth Exchange, and I encourage your viewers to look at ehealthexchange.org, and you will find out this huge database that transfers information from one doctor in one hospital to wherever you are, and you have no control whatsoever over this. And you can see from this, a lot of people don't even know that this thing exists, right? But this exists because HIPAA is not a privacy rule, it's a data sharing rule, and then the electronic health record mandate. And so even the government is involved. There's 5 agencies involved in the eHealth Exchange, exchanging data. People don't know this. And all you need is unique patient identifier, which our organization has stopped for years with the help of Rand Paul and initially Ron Paul, right? We've stopped that. But this would easily become the unique patient identifier and hook into this medical grid. And so, also when you just talk about children, children just look at the technology like it's a great tool, but really we have to reach the youth, with what this really is, and understanding how this is not about freedom. They want to be free, right? This is completely the opposite of freedom.
I just got an email from a wonderful subscriber in Pennsylvania. He attended his child's graduation from high school, and first they had the ceremony, and then they had to go elsewhere. I think it was on the football field to get their diploma. And when he got his diploma, he came back to his parents, and in the folder was his diploma and a complete record of his vaccine history. So their child had a religious exemption, but there's a complete detail on the whole history of each year and the vaccinations in his religious exemption. And so that was all managed, and he was given a printout by the high school.
Right.
Can I just point out that I just did a search on the internet to ask if ID.me was connected to IDEMIA, because it occurred to me, well, maybe that's the same thing, and it is not. But ID.me is another identifying thing that you, as I understand it, you have to get one of those, and I've resisted it, so I don't have one, in order to get on the Social Security, to do online with the Social Security site. So I'm wondering whether there's going to be some kind of coordination with the ID.me and the digital ID and the, all of these things and putting them together.
Well, I do have to I do have to say that I think at the corporate level, right, all of these companies wants to be the top dog, right? So I think there's probably some competition there, but really, where is the government going, and what is the government doing? And clearly, the government is using both of these, and at some point, they certainly could meld them as well as the Real ID. And what the states say. The Secretary of State in Maine testified that the federal government does not get any of the information from Real ID. Well, I would say to that, currently, right? Because what the states say when they conform to the Real ID Act is they conform to whatever the latest Real ID rule says. And if the Real ID rule says that we will now coalesce all of the state databases around the country in order to, for security and safety purposes, right? That's always what they do. Then they'll either have to pull themselves out because they object, or they will simply, like the DMVs have been doing, they'll simply conform, right?
But who are the corporate contractors who are managing the clouds for all those databases? Because if you look at the handful of corporate contractors who manage the cloud, not just for the states, but for the federal government and the 17 intelligence agencies and DOD, it's a relatively small group of the same people. So it's not clear to me that somehow that isn't integrated anyway already.
I'm not certain. Well, I'm not certain either. And the thing to know about the state driver's licenses, of which now include the federal IDs, right? The states and they're all being pulled out of coming out of the DMVs. And IDEMIA is doing, I think, 40 or almost 40 of the driver's licenses and federal IDs, the Real ID. They're doing them. They're doing most of the states already.
Okay.
Well, and Amazon,
is it their cloud, or is it the Amazon and the other corporate clouds that are doing their cloud? Because a lot of this integration happens through the cloud providers and is set up with, all sorts of standards to make it possible to integrate it.
Yeah, that's good. And we haven't actually looked into that. So that's a very good question.
And then there's Palantir, right?
Yes, and then there's Palantir.
Right. So hold on just a second. Before we go, you and your team did a magnificent job in Minnesota of addressing the plans to require electronic digital IDs essentially on your smartphone and getting that rolled back. Can you explain what happened and why this is an important issue that we also need to address?
Yeah, so I think there's about 15 states now that permit digital IDs. And in Minnesota, this was moving forward as a Democrat bill, and in the House we are absolutely split: 67 Republicans, 67 Democrats, and there were Republicans that were perfectly happy about this bill. But then what we did is we went over there and we started talking about what it meant to have a digital ID. And in particular, the thing that was of great concern to them was the fact that it was going to ping the DMV every time you pulled it out and used it. And they hadn't realized that. They hadn't realized that kind of control. Now the author, the Democrat author, that didn't make him unhappy at all. He was just unhappy that we were shutting down his bill. But we clearly got concerned from the Republicans at this kind of idea that the government would have this kind of data on you. And just so that you know, it wasn't going to be a mandated, it was going to be a permitted. But of course, once it's permitted, they're more likely to do what they have always done. It's just not tell you about the others and just push you into the digital ID, which is where they want you. And when AMVA testified to Congress that they were doing this, moving towards digital IDs for all and digital real IDs, federal IDs for all, when they testified about that, they said that their expectation was that they would start with getting 2% digitized. And then they said that for a while, people are going to have both the digital and the hard copy, but eventually we won't need the hard copy anymore. So you can see sort of the frog being cooked here, right? And I guess the other thing I should say about digital is I remember that when we were looking at IDEMIA several years ago, we did see an article, and I think it was out of New Jersey, where they were doing a pilot project with digital IDs. And at that point, they revealed that the police officers would be able to come alongside the car, maybe behind, maybe alongside, not exactly sure, but they would be able to know who the driver was without stopping the car. Well, if they could know who the driver was without stopping the car, clearly they could know who the passengers were as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And
Right.
so you can also see this kind of intrusion and ability against your Fourth Amendment rights that would be available through digitizing your identification documents.
Right. So we're listening to this. Can you step us through all the different things we could do to take action to turn things around?
Yeah, so the first thing is to find out if you have a federal ID, if you have the real ID. See if you have a real ID, and if you do, if it has a star on, then we want you to get rid of your real ID and get back to a standard state driver's license. If you don't have a real ID, stick with that one and do not switch to a real ID. And then we want you to contact your state legislators and tell them that you have figured out what real ID is, and they should as well, and they should extract you from real ID. So they should repeal the laws that conform with the Federal Real ID Act, and then you should contact your AG, your attorneys general, and tell them that it's up to them to protect federalism in the state as the top legal officials, and ask them to take action to stop the real ID in the state. And then you should also contact Congress and your members of Congress and the president in order to tell them, because we really have to highlight the issue. And then I would also encourage people to use social media. Tell the story in social media about what you know and encourage people to get out of the real ID. Call it a federal ID that's part of a national surveillance system. Or you can say it's a federal ID for a digital biometric controlled national surveillance system. Use these words, which are really true, about where it's going and what it does, and get people's attention and ask them to go to refuserealid.org and get all the instructions and the documentation there that they need to understand what Real ID really is and what it really isn't, because there's a barrier here. People believe it's just a nothing burger, and it's really a big deal.
It's a definitely something burger. Okay. The other thing we can do, because you've done an extraordinary job, we've gotten you on Financial Rebellion. This is your third visit. You've been on a lot of great shows. You've been, in Congress. You've been at the state legislature. You and your team are doing a marvelous job. Another thing we can do is support you and the Council for Health Freedom. So explain your website, explain how we can support you.
Yeah, they can find the link actually at the refuserealid.org website, and they can find it as well at just our regular URL, which is cchfreedom.org. And thank you, Lou, for putting that up there, that little red button up there. So cchfreedom.org or refuserealid.org, and just donate online. Of course, you can also send us checks, and we'd be happy for any support that you can throw our direction. And if you want a billboard up in your state, or want to just send some money for billboard or for social media ads, we're also doing that to try and get the public's attention.
Where do you have billboards now?
So we still have one billboard in Osprey, Florida, right on Tamiami Trail.
Mm-hmm.
And that one right there.
Wonderful.
Still up. We had one in Rand Paul's hometown and where his office is. And we also had one in Texas. So
great.
Those are down.
Great.
Wonderful. Twila, thank you so much. I wonder how we get to the youth. That's been going through my mind as I'm listening to you. I mean, we've got to get on TikTok or whatever it is these people are on and explain to them, because we're not even close to getting through to that age group, the teenagers,
Yeah.
and 20s, but there's something to think about.
Well,
Um,
and I think, and we're also trying to get on Charlie Kirk's, um, in Charlie Kirk's either show or, his presentations or something in order to talk to those young people about, because actually I remember that Rand Paul in a presentation in Berkeley got a standing ovation when he was talking about privacy probably about 8 years ago. So I think the young actually do care about privacy, and they certainly don't want to be controlled.
Right. So you know something? I'm going to send this link to a whole bunch of people who might be able to help to do that.
Oh,
So
that'd be
let's see what happens. We want everybody to pray for this effort and for Twyla and her team, because financial transaction control depends on this national ID system. That is the next step. And so this is the one we absolutely must stop.
Absolutely. Twyla, thank you so much for all the work that you do. I love having you on Financial Rebellion.
It's always great to be here. Thank you, Polly. I love it too.
And Catherine and Carolyn, as always, thank you as well. And we'll be back next week, but we're going to go to our Gardasil story of the day. Throughout the whole of June, we are playing Gardasil death and injury stories. So please know the real dangers of the HPV Gardasil vaccine. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Right.
So tell everyone your name.
Mariah Estes.
Okay, Mariah, what is a story for you, about you, right?
Yes,
What
yeah.
happened?
So when I was 20, it was about 16 years ago now, I had the first Gardasil shot. So tiny backstory, I grew up with debilitating migraines. I'm talking like 7 years old, having like screaming migraines and incredible anxiety. So fast forward through school, it's, I'm 20, I'm getting all of my gynecological stuff through Planned Parenthood, and I have my own PCP, husband-wife practice, in a different practice. And I go in, for a visit, and she's like, oh, I see that you never got the Hep B. Do you want to, do your Hep B series? And being 20 and just totally oblivious, I was like, okay, sure, like whatever. So we space them all out, we go through those 3, and then, at the last visit, my nurse practitioner was like, there's a new, vaccine out for, HPV, it's Gardasil, do you want to get the series? And I was like, okay, sure. So I go back in, a couple weeks later for that shot, for the first shot, and I get it, and the rest of the day is fine. And I wake up the next morning with the worst pain in my head I have ever felt in my entire life. I literally woke up and I was like, somebody blew up my brain like a balloon. It was like, it felt swollen. It felt like it was pushing against my skull. And it was not just a part of my brain. It felt like my whole brain was swollen. The pain was excruciating. And I was like, I need to get up, get some water, get some sort of pain reliever, and call my mom. I'm 20. I live alone in my own apartment. So I woke up like this. So I sit up and get up to head to the kitchen, and I'm disoriented and I stumble. I have to like hold myself up on my wall as I'm like making my way to the kitchen. Get water, get ibuprofen. I call my mom, and it was everything that I could do just to get the words out. I had to force them out, and I was like, Mom, something's wrong. I don't know what's going on. And because I grew up with all the debilitating migraines, she was like, well, just go, take your pain, whatever you have for pain, water, go lay down in the cold bathroom floor, just like you used to do, and just let it sleep. You're having some reaction to the shot, and it's a headache, and just go lay down. So I did. And luckily I was able to sleep off the situation, whatever happened. My mom worked literally a minute away, so she came and checked on me about every hour. Which I had no idea. I had no idea any of that happened. So I wake up hours later, it's Friday afternoon, doctor's offices are closed, but I feel okay. I feel just whatever the situation was had passed. And so the weekend goes okay. I'm due to be back in the doctor's office in another week for the next shot. So I was like, whatever, I'll just talk to the nurse practitioner when I go in. And so that day comes, and I told her what happened, and this is still Planned Parenthood, she was like, oh, I've never heard anything like that. No one has ever said they've reacted that way. And I was like, okay. She's like, do you want the other shots? And I was like, no way. And she was like, okay, that's fine. So then I went to my my PCP, my husband-wife practice, and I went and I saw the wife, and it was for something else, and I figured while I was in there I was going to ask her what happened. And so I tell her what happened after the first Gardasil shot, and she was like, oh, well, you had some reaction, but you're fine now. I was like, okay, well, is there a way to, like, know? Like, was it an ingredient? Did I have a reaction to it? Was it a cross reaction because I was on something else? We don't know. Was it what I was experiencing as a kid? We don't know. Is there a way to know if it will happen if I have any other shots? We don't know. And that was it. There was no, like, she was just like, yeah, we don't know. Yeah, we don't know. And I was just like, okay, like, I guess we're just going to proceed on with the rest of the appointment. And so she offered no help. Her husband, I asked him about it, and he threw up his hands. I don't know. I have no idea. A totally separate appointment. So that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to take it to the internet. So I went to the internet and I found forums of all of these parents and these moms who are like, this happened to my daughter after this shot, and it was encephalitis, and we went to the hospital, and you know, and it was just like reply, me too, me too, me too, my daughter too, and it was just like hundreds and hundreds of people, and I was like, are you kidding me? Was my brain swollen like so badly in that point? Like, could I have been brain damaged? Could I have died on my bathroom floor? I have no idea. So then I fast forward to when I have my son, and I asked his pediatrician the same thing. I was like, you know, this is what I think happened after this shot. And she's like, I think you're probably right. And I was like, well, will it happen to him if I give him anything? And, you know, that shot or any other shot? And she's like, there's no way to tell. So from that day forward, I'm done with vaccines. My son has only had the vitamin K shot because I was assured there was nothing else in that one. And so now that I know, but he's not had any. But
How old is he?
6.
And how's he doing?
He's phenomenal. Energy is through the roof. He's intelligent. He's, you know, the best little kid you can ask for. But no way, no, I won't touch another shot. That was my brain. Like, I could have died. Like, what would have happened? I have no idea, and no one's been able to tell me. No, I've not found a medical professional to have an honest conversation with about it.
You saved your son.
I believe so. No way. They're going to have to fight me to get to him. Like, you know, and we're hurting here in Maine. Like, Maine was hit really hard with the restrictions, and still, we're tired, but we're pissed. We're fed up. So,
I'm sorry that happened to you.
like, I'm okay. You know, I'm all right. You know what I mean? My son's okay, but I'm not about to sit down and be quiet.
It's interesting
what I mean?
when you suddenly know and you realize what's happened.
Yeah. And it makes me wonder, am I experiencing what all those little kids are experiencing? You know, that when they're disoriented and they can't hold themselves up, you know, and they can't speak. I almost couldn't even speak and get the words out, you know? Like, did I, as a fully fledged adult, experience what they're experiencing, and now I can talk about it? You know what I mean? I just feel bad for the kids. You know, all those poor kids and the parents and sorry parents. Oh my gosh, you know? It's madness. So here I am now. I'm not going to shut up about it.
Thank you.
Know? Yeah.
Thank you for telling your story so well. Thank you.
Yeah, cool.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.